Hello, I'm Lynn Dick, Head of Programmes Engagement and Learning at John Hansard Gallery. Welcome to this evening's event, which is part of the Gallery's ongoing literature development and engagement programme. My colleagues Diana Doki, Communities Curator, and Hannah Cox, Duty Manager, have organised this event in partnership with the University of Southampton Institute for Arts and Humanities and the Public Engagement with Research Unit. Before I hand over, I have a few notices. The event will be recorded and shared on the John Hansard Gallery website and the Southampton Science and Engineering Festival websites. A feedback questionnaire will pop up at the end, and we would love to receive your comments. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's event, and I will now hand over to our guest speakers, Professor Rachel Mills, followed by Professor Nikki Marsh.
It is with great pleasure that I welcome you all to the Poetic Science live showcase. This event is a special edition of poetry at JHG. Poetic Science was developed in partnership with John Hansard Gallery and the Public Engagement with Research Unit and the Southampton Institute for Arts and Humanities at the University of Southampton. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Environmental and Life Sciences, and I'm the executive sponsor of what's called the Science and Engineering Festival, which is running throughout this week with an exciting interdisciplinary virtual program, which is reaching worldwide audiences like tonight. This Poetic Science project is a key demonstration of our collaborative approach at the university, and it brings together art, culture, creativity, and the sciences. Poetic Science fosters multidisciplinarity, it supports researchers at all career stages in sciences, and it supports them to further develop their skills in creative engagement, building new communication techniques for their research through the genre of poetry. So between late January and early March this year, during our last lockdown, a cohort of 6 brave volunteers participated in 3 skills development workshops led by creative writer and poet, Dr Helen Eastman, who you'll meet shortly. These 6 new poets have completely immersed themselves in this endeavour, taking up the challenge of translating their research and life experiences into creative poetic form. I joined the group this week for their last session to see their progress and to see the process of creativity at work. And I was really privileged to hear their communal poem, which you'll hear tonight. It's a collective piece of work that is really exciting. I could also see the flow of information and ideas between the poets, and I'm particularly interested to hear Helen's poems, which she has developed as she's learned from the science team. As a scientist myself, I can now really understand how the poetic form can help focus ideas. It stimulates new connections and creativity, the creativity we all need for inspiration and new ideas as scientists. But I'm also really aware that in these difficult times, the intersection of creativity and science can help us find a space in which we can reflect and make sense of the world around us. So on behalf of the University of Southampton, the project partners, our incredible poets you're going to hear tonight, and our lead creative writer, I thank you for joining us this evening. And I now hand over to Professor Nikki Marsh, the Associate Dean for Research and Enterprise for the Faculty of Arts and Humanities. And she will talk further about the Southampton Institute for Arts and Humanities, its long-standing history of engagement and research in the field of poetry, creative writing, and science. Over to you, Nikki.
Thanks, Rachel. So I want to take this opportunity of just giving a little bit of a broader context for thinking about poetry and science and what it's meant in Southampton. So one of the aims of the Southampton Institute for Arts and Humanities, and I'm the Associate Dean for the Faculty of Arts and Humanities and a Director of this institute, is to allow new kinds of conversations to occur across the university, to use the resources of the arts and humanities to lead on collaborative projects. We want to work across scholarly and creative practices in order to find new kinds of answers to very stubborn and old challenges, to meet the social, political, economic, and of course, environmental crises of our time. And our assumption is that the arts and humanities offer necessary critical and conceptual methods for solving these problems, and attention not only to creativity and imagination, but to ethics, history, culture, language, representation, produces richer, more innovative, and ultimately more useful research. Such an assertion might appear, although perhaps not to this audience, idealistic in the face of the enormous challenges we now face. So it's perhaps salutary to remember that this is where Southampton's roots lie. The university emerged from the Hartley Institution, enabled by a bequest from Henry Robinson Hartley in 1862, And what Henry Robinson Hartley wanted was an organisation that would promote the study and advancement of the sciences of natural history, astronomy, antiquities, classical and oriental literatures. Hartley's desire to put poetry, philosophy and science together was of course not untypical of his time. The first edition of Scientific American was published just 5 years before this bequest and included a poem called Attraction that made explicit the connections between gravity, magnetism and sexual allure. The disciplines, as they eventually had to be settled and be delineated, had not yet occurred. And C.P. Snow's warning against the dangers of the separation of the two cultures was still some 100 years away. So of course we no longer have the disciplines in the forms that Hartley Robinson imagined. But the aspiration to think across science and culture and arts is one that we can hold on to, and indeed is one that's never entirely gone away in Southampton. We can draw a dotted line from its origins to now. So F.T. Prince, the modernist poet, who was one of the first heads of departments of the English department in Southampton, wrote of a wide and wingless path to the impossible. And the intersections between poetry and science have been explored in this path in Southampton many times since. We've hosted the Litmus project that pairs engineering postdocs with poets to co-produce works. We've written research on poetry in the Victorian scientists and on poetry in contemporary physics. And our research in this area has gained significant attention. And indeed, the importance of science and poetry being thought about together is evident in the fact that Scientific American has it once more got a poetry column in its monthly publications. So when we think about the relationship between science and poetry, we are embedded in a local, but also an international and a very long history. Poets have been scientists and scientists have been poets for a long time. I'm just going to touch very briefly on 3 moments from that history to draw out some examples to think about why metaphor, experimentation, precision, imagination and transformation, things that are so key to both poetry and to science, we can only see when they're put into conversation with one another. So in the 17th century, scientists often wrote their experiments as poems. Poetry was considered to be the language of intellectual precision, the language of clarity. As one critic of the period has suggested, how to do science was not an empirical question, but also a rhetorical one. It was a question of how to say it. And the idea that naming and describing a phenomena or a discovery is itself a way of understanding and conceptualizing it has been central to the connections between poets and scientists. And of course, the relationship is reciprocal. Some of the most famous poets of the 17th century, John Donne, William Shakespeare, were influenced by the revolutions occurring in the natural sciences around them. In 1610, Galileo began using his telescope to examine the limits of the solar system. And in 1611, Donne wrote An Anatomy of the World, the first anniversary that suggested that this new philosophy calls all in doubt. The element of fire is quite put out. The sun is lost and the earth, and no man's wit can well direct him where to look for it. By the 18th century, we begin to see the separation of the disciplines, but Romanticism's fascination with the natural world drew them again and again to the world of science. Wordsworth's famous Lonely as a Cloud line, for example, was surpassed by Goethe, his German counterpart, who was so fascinated by the study of clouds that he wrote a poem about each kind of classification, nimbus, cirrus, cumulus, and stratus, as well as an ode to the scientists who devised them. To find yourself in the infinite, you must distinguish and then combine. Therefore, my winged song thanks the man who distinguished cloud from cloud. The poet's fascination with science was reflected differently in the 19th century, as one of its most significant scientists, James Clerk Maxwell, who formulated the theory of electromagnetic radiation and worked closely with Michael Faraday, was also a prolific and well-published poet. And his scientific imagination was represented in his poetry, as he wrote texts such as A Problem in Dynamics and Molecular Evolution in Verse. Maxwell worked alongside his wife in his laboratory, and his love poetry to her was framed through their shared scientific rather than romantic endeavors. The gliding fire with central wire, the fine degrees distinctly showing. Swing, magnet, swing, advancing and receding. Swing, magnet. Answer, dearest, what's your final reading? And of course, this fascination with poetry and science has carried on into the 20th century, as poets have worked with the languages and discoveries of our own era in their writing. John Hansard Gallery's current poet in residence, Ella Frears, has been a writer in residence in a physics lab, amongst other places, and indeed is writing a poem about our scientific community at the moment. I wanted to leave us with one last example, and it's from the Canadian poet Christian Bock's poem, The Xenotext, which he describes as a 9-year-long attempt to create living poetry. Bock uses a chemical alphabet to translate his poem into a sequence of DNA that is implanted into the genome of a bacteria. In this case, a microbe capable of surviving without mutation in the most hostile of environments, even outer space. Bock, in his own words, is engineering a life form so that it becomes not only a durable archive for storing a poem, but also a machine for writing a poem, one that can persist on the planet until the sun itself explodes. Or, as the BBC headlines describe the poem, proving perhaps that language is really everything, poet writes verse in bug's genes and receives reply. I'm going to hand over now, I think, to Rhonda.
Thank you, Nikki. Apologies all for few internet connection issues, but that's the world in which we live in. Yes, so thank you so much, Nikki, Rachel and Lynn, and hello everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. Just to mention that should there be time at the end of the readings, we'll be facilitating an open Q&A. So if you'd like to ask the cohort or partners questions, then please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen, which is just next to the record button. But before I hand over to Dr. Helen Eastman and the Poetic Science cohort, I just wanted to say a few words to provide a bit of a context about the project. This live showcase event is the culmination of a collaboration between project partners to initiate activity that brings both science and poetry together and supports the creative skills development of scientists across different career stages and disciplines. Now, in the autumn of 2020, a call out was published for those within the science community in the university to submit an expression of interest to take part in this, what is really a pilot developmental project. The selected participants then engaged in a series of skills development workshops with creative writer, poet Dr. Helen Eastman. And with support from Helen and between a limited time frame, I would say, between January and March, they developed their poetry writing skills over 2 intensive workshops, which were followed by a workshop on performing poetry live, and in this instance, also online, all of which took place in the midst of another lockdown. The poems you hear today are a testament to the dedication and commitment of both the cohort and writer Helen. Never more so now has science and art been so important to us. The poems you're about to hear echo this, not only in terms of science communications and research through poetry, but poetry as a particular special genre, providing that space for reflection at an individual and personal level. And by way of introduction, I'd like to provide a brief kind of biography about Dr. Helen Eastman, who we're really fortunate enough who's been really a key kind of steer for this project. Helen is a poet, librettist and playwright. 15 years ago, she founded Live Canon, a poetry organisation running events, workshops and publishing widely. She read classics and English at Oxford, has a master's degree in theatre direction from LAMDA and a doctorate in classics from King's College London. She is artistic associate of the APGRD at Oxford University and a visiting lecturer at Westminster University in creative writing. Currently, she's writing a libretto about climate protest for Montpellier Opera House. Anyway, without further delay, I hand over to Dr. Helen Eastman, who will be facilitating the showcase.
Thank you so much, Rhonda, and thank you to to Rachel, to Lynn, to Nikki, and to Diana for the enormous welcome I received from the John Hansard Gallery and from Southampton University when embarking on this project. It's been such a joy and a privilege to be within an environment where interdisciplinarity and knowledge exchange has been so progressively enabled, outreach so valued so highly, and to feel that this project has been so central to all of us for the last few months in our own academic endeavours. We're here on Zoom, obviously. It was intended that this performance would take place at the John Hansard Gallery, but obviously for a year now, there have been no live poetry events, which has been challenging in many ways for the poetry community, and it's a great shame not to be in the gallery, but has also been extraordinary in terms of being able to invite audiences internationally and for a massive geographic spread to listen to poetry. So poetry on Zoom has been booming, we might say. Part of what I was asked to do with the poets is to spend, we had 6 hours of workshop time, and it was to spend 4 hours thinking about writing and 2 hours thinking about performing. In this case, this rather strange phenomenon of performing on Zoom. And it's been an absolute joy to spend that time. It's a tough call to explore a new art form in 6 hours of workshopping, and I'm very, very grateful that it wasn't the other way around and I wasn't trying to learn an entire discipline of chemistry or physics in 6 hours, because if I was being asked to demonstrate my mastery of that right now, I'm sure it would be catastrophic. But one of the incredible things about poetry as a form is that the basic tools of it, language, are something we all have access to. So we can all start to engage and jump in and have a go. And I've been so impressed by the incredible willingness of this cohort to jump in and have a go. And I'm really excited about sharing with you this evening some of that work. There have been 6 participants in the project. I'm just checking that, can you see me as opposed to seeing Rhonda's screen? I'm just gonna, if that is the case, I'm just going to make sure that you can, is that all good? Perhaps someone can type me a message in the chat if there's a problem. Yes, we can. Brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you. Before we carry on, I'm going to introduce to you the 6 members of the cohort, and you'll find out a little bit more about their research and their work as we go through, because it obviously shines through their writing. But it's good to start with having an idea of the unbelievable multidisciplinarity in this group that I was so privileged to meet. First of all, Professor Jim Anderson. Jim Anderson is a professor of mathematics at the University of Southampton. He has a particular interest in geometry, and his other interests include science fiction and the traditional Japanese martial art of Aikido. Professor Jeremy Frey. Jeremy is a professor of physical chemistry at the University of Southampton. He's interested in imaging molecules and telling stories about how they behave and how the digital age is changing the way we tell these stories. Dr. Sadie Jones works as the astronomy public engagement leader, and over the last 4 years, she's managed the award-winning Soton Astro Art project. Her research involves using radio and X-ray telescopes to observe supermassive black holes in distant galaxies. Dr. Nikhil Mistry. Nikhil is a researcher in underwater acoustics, interested in using sound to see through our oceans and look into the life on the seafloor, and also the interaction between sound and underwater bubbles. He's also very active in science communication, outreach and engagement, running numerous sound projects and producing content to help learn about the science of sound. And Jonathan James. Jay is in his final year as a PhD researcher in respiratory immunology with the University of Southampton. During his time here, he discovered a love of expressing science in myriad forms in the hope of evoking his passion for it for others and improving the accessibility of science for all. And Hannah Cox, who is duty manager at the John Hansard Gallery since 2017. She began poetry at JHG events in 2013 with the intention of inviting local poets to respond to themes of the exhibitions. And poetry at JHG has since led to further gallery engagement with creative writing programs, organisation and events in Southampton, such as So Write, Hands-on Humanities Festival, and the development of a gallery writer in residence role. So what an incredible room full of people to bring together. We started by thinking about some of our own preconceptions of science and poetry. We often find, as Nikki said, that there's an immediate assumption when talking about science and poetry that they're about as different as disciplines can get, that science is rigid, rules-orientated, answer-driven, fact-driven, and poetry is free and fluid and creative or imaginative. But we agreed that that is a product of very modern separative thinking and a very separate education system. as we sort of narrow down disciplines further and further and further. We came to agree between us that science and poetry are both ways of expressing and understanding the world around us, that both use symbolism, that both strive for precision and economy, both try to choose exactly the right words to convey what they mean. Henri Poincaré, a French polymath who laid the foundations of two different fields of mathematics in the early 1900s, described mathematics as the art of giving the same name to different things, which sounds a lot like poetry and a lot like our workshops, where we found that we were often saying the same things, but in very different ways. It was Albert Einstein who said pure mathematics is in its way the poetry of logical ideas. And as we've gone through our workshops, we've riffed again and again on the idea of how we can bring these two discourses and these two different ways of writing, thinking, communicating together. So we decided to start the writing with the personal. We watched Rita Dove's poem, Maple Valley Branch Library. We watched a reading of it where she was reading it at the White House at a poetry event that Barack Obama had organized. And in it, she pinpoints where her passion for her subject started, as being in the Maple Valley Branch Library when she was a child, and her curiosity and excitement about books and literature were nurtured by the librarian there. So I asked each of our cohort to think about where their passion for their subject was first awoken, and to try to tell the story of their journey into their field. We looked at some different forms which can help with the telling of stories in poetry. We looked at forms like terza-rima and other forms that are often used for storytelling. So the first chunk of poems that you're going to hear tonight is each person in the cohort reading a poem that we've loosely called the foundation myths, their own personal stories of coming into their science. It's worth saying that they're reading on Zoom. It's a really brave thing to do because you get no audience feedback whatsoever. Normally at a reading, you can see real live people and you can see from their body language that they are supporting you and willing you on, and they applaud thunderously when you finish a poem. And on Zoom, you get none of that. You just get the big silence and the big void. But I'd like to reassure our cohort that everybody watching this, whether they're watching it in the Zoom or watching it on Facebook, are absolutely rooting for you and supporting you and thunderingly applauding you from wherever they are. If you want to use the chat function to comment on the poems, to tell the poets they are brilliant, please do, but maybe post comments in between the poems rather than during them so it doesn't distract, but in between poems, feel free to compliment away. So I'm going to hand over to Jim, and all 6 members of the cohort are going to read a poem that in some way talks about their journey into science.
This is the hypothetical roof. I stand on the hypothetical roof of an old calculus problem, surrounded by the mists of not knowing, perhaps the first magic I remember, height and time intertwined, set in motion with the drop of a rock. Non-existent wind swirls in my hair, the rock, strangely weightless, a figment of my imagination. Plucked from the stream behind our house, always this same rock I bring to the roof, it returning to me after each drop. The spells of equations cast on blackboards with colored chalk, on paper with hieroglyphic pen, I watched with rapt attention as the gray-haired math magician unraveled the deep mysteries. He rent asunder the gathered mists, brought us to the heart of the not yet known, spell built upon spell, each impossible at first to cast, until practice rendered each simple, and the logic's bright glow replaced magic's dark myth.
My life as a chemist. As a child, I got to play with a large kitchen chemistry set. It fizzed, bubbled, the color changed, spilt all over the table. A big smile, birthday party, water turned to wine. Almost the only one in a large lab with deep mahogany bench, I carefully used the tall glassware, watching for the swirl of purple. Rolls of paper with fine lines, read with graduated magnifying glass. Numbers to holes in punch cards, dropped. Never mind, reassembled into my first computer program. Designing Lego style, my own experiments, connections with the wider sciences. No topic for which entry barred, no area from which I could not learn. Imagination took me everywhere, some more useful than elsewhere. Buzzing tea room, lunch and coffee, conversations, questions, puzzles, worked out well for me with my colleagues across chemistry. digital age, a new playground opens up. Colleagues from wider fields erupt. Storytelling, and now poetry, transform the way children see their chemistry.
This poem's called Satsuma. Stretched on tippy toes, balancing on the small brick wall, I peer over the wooden panel fence to help the neighbours feed the koi in their pond. Orange scales glittering in the sunshine. Mum calls me inside to the front room. Skipping through the hall, I plonk myself down on the floor, sat straight backed, legs outstretched under the coffee table, just the right height for me. She is holding a big folder, too big for me to hold. But to my delight, she pulls out drawing after drawing after drawing. A small chalk field mouse, bright pastel sunsets, and devoted sketches of teenage dad. I am so happy and surprised. Mum did this? My view of her shifts. She is still mum, but has become something more. She wants to teach me to draw opposite the red brick fireplace, where two replica pistols hang upon it, pointing to the centre. Antique binoculars placed on the shelf stand like monoliths, whilst the gold carriage clock gently spins in the centre, softly ticking away the time. Paper is set on the coffee table, pencils, rubber, and a satsuma, bright orange against the vast blank page. I stare at it closely, close enough to smell the sweet citrus, whilst listening to instructions. Practice and pick a technique, hatch, cross-hatch stippling, look at the form, shape, colours, shading, light source. Sun is shining through the netted windows, shadows speckling the carpet. Mum gets angry, thinks I'm not listening. I am.
This is my acoustic acrostic. A professor once showed me cosines and sines, overlapping, undulating, superimposing with time. It's all around us, in the air, land and sea. Come listen, come learn, come listen with me.
This is Searching for the One. Once upon a boy in school, I flirted with the girls. I'd wave at them across the halls, I'd stare at all their curls. One was called architect, another was accountant. I even held young vet's hand, but that's all that amounted. As a teen, I had to think, unsure of what I wanted. At first, I courted medicine. Her needs left me daunted. And then I met a stylish girl, an intellect for sure. She said, "You can call me science." Her voice and actions pure. I was swept away in facts. Knowledge did we chase, with logic cold and hard she'd talk, and yet with so much grace. 3 years on, I felt absorbed, her logic inside me. But I knew something was amiss, a warmth I wished to see. I said, "With you, I somehow feel alone." She said, "The facts support this." I said, "I need some love and warmth," and with a kiss, we parted. Lost again, I needed space. I looked to foreign lands, where a girl alive with passion took me by the hands. As I unpacked, I felt the warmth, the sea of neon lights, contrasted by paddy fields that croaked all day and night. She said her name was Sensei. She made me feel alive. Would plan, would teach, would think all day. Why, out here, I could thrive. I felt the joy, I felt the spark, I light her face each day. But I didn't feel accepted, not knowing what to say. And slowly, as we went through life, the days they would repeat. I missed the chance to learn new stuff. The lessons would repeat. And so sayonara to my sensei. I'm sorry we couldn't be. I'll miss you, but I've realized this life's just not for me. And home I came, but now I knew the things that I must see. In the one I'm searching for, combining them is key. And then I met her, quite by chance. She winked and smiled at me. She told me all the things we'd do. Come join me if you're free. This girl, she was so flexible, mixing science with art. Other days we'd laugh and cry in the lessons we'd impart. Science is logic, sensei's joy, into love I'd fall. Researching the facts we teach, we can have it all. With poems, art and stories, our science we augment. I bet you want to know her name. Public engagement.
This is a poem called The Journey. So, super massive black holes exist. An actual thing at the very center of every galaxy. Remarkable, colossal, 100 million suns squashed beyond physics. Wheeled into the classroom, the large TV, the creaky wheels. Our teacher, she pushes it and smiles. I'm sat up front, first wooden bench, high on rickety wooden stool. Everyone is fixated in wonder. The pure excitement of watching television in a science class. This is today's lesson, watching TV. Energy grows in all of us, the expectation, the theatre of it. Trolley wheels stop creaking, centre stage. The show, Horizon, recorded by the teacher just last night, she had to show it to us all today. The room is silent now, brown, wooden and cold, outside grey. Here we learn about biology, normally, nature. But the black holes on the screen, they are nature too, apparently. So the screen says, how can they be our very own galaxy? All the 100 billion galaxies, they all have one, a super massive black hole. Sarah shouts, is this right, miss? Is this really science? Miss responds, yes. I'm totally transfixed. Behind me, Kelly and Alex are giggling. Some gossip, but I don't care. This new information, immense. My mind sparked. I didn't know. Could our Milky Way galaxy really be the host of something so enormous? The scale and mass of it, it's all so vast, yet it is real, the center of everything. You can do it. You make maps of active galactic nuclei, aka supermassive black holes. See, examine, be the first. You know, some have jets that extend for hundreds of light years. Some don't. It's a mystery. You'll get paid to look at space, explore, travel to big telescopes. Be the first to unravel it all. Analyze data, this puzzling light. You will be the center. No one else, no one before you. Not this galaxy anyway, not in this way. It's an enigma, this science, a dark art, radio waves, extending, tracing jets, X-rays too, mapping the swirl, become an artist, a witch, interpret, EM light, the secrets, the event, horizon, singularity. It will be you the center.
Thank you so much, Sadie. And thank you to all of you for being so brave and sharing the myriad of responses to that idea of finding that moment of inspiration where you fell in love with your subject. As well as looking at, we were aware we were going to share these poems orally, but we were also thinking about how poems shape on the page and the relationship between the black writing and the white space in poetry. So I've just asked Sadie to share that poem with you, because the shape's doing lots of different things there. One of the things it's doing is giving us a different relationship in terms of tempo between the idea of space at the top and the bottom, and then this very, very bubbly experience in the classroom, watching, we all remember it, the TV being wheeled in and getting to watch TV in the center of the poem, but it's also reflecting a scientific shape. Sadie, can you just tell us a little bit more about that shape?
Yeah, so the middle of the poem where I'm at school is meant to represent the supermassive black hole and the kind of galaxy around it. And then these two features here, well, they can either be the jet that's coming out of a massive black hole, which is what I was researching, or kind of in this case, it could also be like the singularity inside the black hole.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Sadie. I'm going to come to reading some poems later, and you'll see just how influenced I was by Sadie's work when we come to that. But we did look at this idea of the shape of the poetry on the page and the visual poem, and I think Jeremy's just got a poem he's going to share with us now, if he can screen share for a second. We call them concrete poems, so poems that express something through their shape and their visual, as well as through their words. And we talked about that as really important in the current world of sharing information. We talked about poster poems, Instagram poems, all kinds of ways of sharing information visually. So perhaps, Jeremy, you could just read this for us.
The flask. This flask, just within my grasp, my hopes and wishes contained within this flask, measured, poured out, acted on. At first it did not work, nothing happened. Then relief when, slowly, unevenly, but certainly, growing stronger and completed with almost perfect impact, pleased, happy, joyful, and fully inspired to move on to the next.
Thanks, Jeremy. I love your bubbles that are exploding away at the top. So we then moved on from thinking about the concrete poem to looking at found poems. So found poems are poems that use text that pre-exists in the world. It could be a shopping list, it could be another piece of literature, it could be an academic text, a political text, a legal text, but somehow or other it takes language which is already there and it edits it, sometimes literally by cutting it up and reimagining it. Cut up poems are very popular with the Dadaists, and a lot of the early Pink Floyd lyrics were written that way. Or it can involve editing a text, redacting a text, taking text away to leave a skeleton of a different text underneath it. But it's a particularly interesting approach to an interdisciplinary workshop, because what we can do is we can take texts from lots of different discourses and start to reframe them. The act of creating a found poem is to put a different lens or a different gaze onto a text and your relationship with it. So sometimes it's a way of taking something that might be very familiar with you, a scientific text that you're very familiar with, maybe even something you've written as an academic text, and then revisioning and representing it in a different way. We all had a go at this, and now the poets from the cohort are all going to share with you some found poems. I'm going to ask that before they share them with you, if they like, they perhaps share with you where the text came from as well, because that context is I think, part of the enjoyment of that experience. But each person's taken a text that comes from within their own discipline and then reframed it as a poem. So over to Jeremy. Thank you.
Thank you. So my poem is called An Ode to Ayupak, and it represents my call to action to modernize the union of pure and applied chemistry, which is known as Ayupak, make it more relevant for the current world. Current world conditions nicely demonstrate the need, start to nurture and grow the seed, lively response to take the lead, supporting chemical collaborations. Enabled by the digital computer age, setting, refining, redefining standards, helping solving the global hazards, energy, water, health, and feed. We must not be bystanders. Setting chemists front of stage, all invested in AI, not just from the tin. Basic, fair, unbiased, explainable techniques begin, decidedly changing our discipline. a new variety for our digital orchard. AI, theory, computation, and experiments allied to train the next generation, people and facilities from sciences, arts, and humanities, all crucial, to inform the digital native of their chemistry. Without continued effort, ideas wither, dramatic short-term gains from individual drums, others balanced by longer-term outcomes. Collaboration, academic, industrial hums, the whole community come hither. Chemistry, creative science, the future's bright. Digital is the novel way, what to make and measure, doing all this together. Success, yes, and IUPAC has its part to play.
So mine is called Insert Equation. A long while back, I bought about 200 acoustic books from an old professor, and I stood in front of these books and tried to pick one that looked as boring as possible. So this is from volume 12, part 1 of the 1990 proceedings of the meeting by the Institute of Acoustics. And I picked words at random. So here we go. Insert equation. Proceedings of chaos. Insert equation. Uncertainty, uncertainty. Insert equation. Conclusion, references. Insert equation. The study has highlighted some of the problems. This can be approached from more than one point of view. Several models have been investigated. Insert equation. There is currently a great deal of interest. It has been demonstrated. Insert equation. An alternative approach. Insert equation. Considered to be both interesting and encouraging. Insert equation. Development of the homoclinic tangle. Now chaos covers the whole science angle. Popular mechanisms such as woodwinds or bowed strings have become fascinating. Closely related with a more fascinating topic. Chaos. Insert equation.
This poem is from some texts that I was writing with my line manager about the citizen science project called the Aurora Zoo that we just, it's been going on for a whole year, but we were trying to show the impact that that project had. And then I kind of mashed this up with some text I found online, which was explaining the physics of aurora to children. The poem is called We Need Help. We have thousands of hours of aurora video, most of which has never been looked at. We need help from citizen scientists. Dazzling coloured light, aligned with the magnetic zenith, Roman goddess of the dawn. Shapes and forms, with arcs and rays. Shimmering curtains, bands, waves, changing shape. Light moves across the sky, brighten and fade. Charged particles in the solar wind, toward north and south. Polar regions, crash. Gases in the atmosphere, oxygen and nitrogen. Collisions give off light. We have thousands of hours of aurora video, most of which has never been looked at. We need help from citizen scientists.
So this found poem I made from text that's on the John Hansard Gallery website about page. And the penultimate line was the inspiration for the overall theme. And it's called We Are Proud to Present. We are proud to present our great vision of the widest challenge, to develop a better world via art. To realise this critically acclaimed possible change, we create our leading part. We want to inspire people in the heart. We create extraordinary encounters that excite the world to play with great art. Roll in the cultural life. The audience are outstanding.
This is called Conjecture Zero. It is from a paper I wrote close to 10 years ago now, but the general question is one that I've actually been working on since I worked on a part of it in my PhD going back to about 1988. And this is the fifth paper on this particular topic that I wrote. So it's close to my heart. Conjecture Zero. We continue here the investigation of the relationship between the intersection of a pair of subgroups of a Kleinian group, and in particular, the limit set of that intersection, and the intersection of the limit sets of the subgroups. And so investigate whether we can see in this case an emergent curious distributivity. Of specific interest is the extent to which the intersection of the limit sets being non-empty implies the intersection of the subgroups is then non-trivial. The main purpose of this note is to consider the conjecture due to Susskind, given below as Conjecture Zero. We are unfortunately not able at this point to give a complete proof of Conjecture Zero. We are able to show that Conjecture Zero holds in a particular case, given below as proposition 1. We then use a result of Bishop and Jones to conclude that in fact, Conjecture Zero holds most of the time. In addition, we provide examples to show that Conjecture Zero is as reasonably sharp as it can be. These are given below as propositions 2 and 3. In light of proposition 3, we cannot expect that the inclusion at the conclusion of Conjecture Zero is in fact inequality in general. And in fact, it's not, because Conjecture Zero is false.
Great. So I've taken some time to answer some of the most common questions on a popular search engine. So this is Science Knows. Why do men have nipples? We start off as females. Does my bum look 40? It ages with your body. Does farting burn calories? Unlikely by our tallies. What happens if you drink blood? Iron's toxic, so nothing good. Do penguins have knees? They do indeed, to waddle with ease. You see, these things we work to learn and share. We spread the news because we care. While science seems cold and hard with logic, we still like to think it can spread some magic. Do worms have eyes? They don't. It's all lies. Am I a psycho? Give this test a go. Do pigs sweat? Yes, you bet. Is the world flat? Where's your tin hat? When will I die? What things underlie? Why are we here? To spread some cheer? Hold it right there, I'm starting to falter. We don't know it all, we don't have the data. So let's make a list of what's left to know. Mysteries of life are not science's foe. Is the universe infinite? A mesmerizing prospect. Is reality real? Or a simulation in which we feel? Why do we dream? A mystery, it would seem. How many species are there? Some we can't find, still lurk in their lair. What happens when we die? One with the earth or rising to the sky? Where does consciousness come from? Evolved introspection or something from beyond?
Thank you so much, Jay, and thank you to all of you for those encounters. It's really fascinating also to find a way to take subject-specific text and open that discourse out to everybody, and there's no better way of doing that than thinking of reframing it or reading it in another context, like a poetry reading. We moved on to looking at the essential idea of metaphor. which Nikki brought up in her brilliant opening, which is often as fundamental to scientific thinking and communication as it is to poetry. Most hypotheses have to start with the idea that something might be like something else. Nobel Prize winning physics can start with the idea that maybe the structure of an atom might be like the structure of a solar system, and a poem can start with the idea that maybe something might be like something else. And I say that because I'm going to share with you now the first 3 of 5 poems that I've written during this residency, and I think certainly these first 3 poems start being about science and ultimately end up being about something else more personal in the way that the science becomes a metaphor for things in our own lives. I tried to write a piece in response to each of the scientists' area of science. That involved quite a lot of questions from me and speedy learning. And the first poem that I'm going to read is inspired by Jim's work on non-Euclidean geometry. I had a little bit of an idea what Euclid was. I'd written an opera before about Ada Lovelace, the mathematician, but certainly non-Euclidean geometry was totally new to me. And Jim sent me an incredible introductory sort of a video that explained it through the idea of knots, and that if we have 2 knots, it can be easier to work out if they're identical or not by looking at the inverse of them, the white space around them, which made me think a lot about the white space around the black words that I write on pages, and also made me think a lot about the things that are not there in a bigger context. So this poem is called Not Knots. The mathematician is explaining what a knot is not, and that it's easier to tell if 2 knots are alike or not by comparing the white space around them, what they are not, their complement or their inverse. And all I can think of is all the places that you are not, and my shame that I have never found you in my black marks on white nothing. Because from the moment we scattered your dust, you have always been the sea and not the ship, the wind and not the mill, the canvas and not the daub, the page and not the poem, the knot and not the knot. So thank you to Jim for the conversations that inspired that way of thinking about knots and knots. That might be one that works better on the page, where you can see when it's KNOT or when it's NOT, but I wanted to share that with you. The second poem I'm going to share now is in response to work that Jay is involved in at the moment, making a model of a lung. And he's working on making a commercial model of a lung that allows for better and more efficient testing of drugs, quite important at the moment when respiratory issues are so prevalent in the world. And he told me a little bit about the model that he was working on and used some very brilliant language to describe it, which comes up in the poem. And then we talked a lot about how little we think about breathing, something we all do, but maybe don't think about a lot. And I thought about times when I've consciously thought about breathing. And this is the poem that came out of that, and it's called Learning to Breathe Again. I never thought much about breathing until 2 of us went to sleep and only 1 of us woke up. Decades later, I'm looking at a model of a lung. It's for screening drugs. It boasts Goldilocks membranes, not too thick, not too thin, and pores not too big and not too small. Was I remiss to just assume you'd keep doing it? Should I have reminded you daily, an hourly call, tattooed it on your hand, Banksy'd the wall? Could I have changed anything at all? There was the voice tutor at drama school and the NCT antenatal classes. They kind of merge in my mind. Breathe in for 5 and out for 20, or was it 20 and 5? Don't lift the shoulders or the chest. Breathe into the small of the back. Breathe out on an ah sound or an oo sound or e, but not all at once. Control the breath. Release it gradually. We are not steam trains. Control. Now, it is not often I have to remember to breathe, and only sometimes with the help of a paper bag, thank you, Greg's, or a kind passerby counting. It's not often I have to remember to breathe, and only sometimes when I smell that mash and disinfectant of hospital canteen. It is not often I have to remember to breathe, and sometimes I can sleep next to someone without needing to hear them snoring to be sure they're breathing too. So thank you very much to Jay for all the conversations that inspired that and answering my questions about lungs and the Goldilocks terminology on your model, and for that incredible inspiration. And the third poem I'm going to read in this section is in response to Sadie's work on black holes, which is mind-blowing. And in order to try and get my head around it, she shared with me really kindly a video of her giving an outreach talk for A-level students, which is about my level. It was brilliant. She is a goddess of outreach, clearly. And then I started talking to my children at home about black holes and over dinner, and this poem emerged, and I just called it Black Holes. The 13-year-old is correcting the 7-year-old. It is important that he knows that a black hole is not actually a hole or black. The 13-year-old has inhaled Stephen Hawking abridged and will not stand for such inaccuracies of language. The language rebels. Its nomenclature goes beyond the literal, it retorts. Where no light reflects, what better word than black? And while the shape might be more gurgling plug or Dorothy tornado, a hole can stretch its O in 4 dimensions. The language concedes. Okay, objects move through time as well as space. And yes, when you add gravity to the mix, mass and energy affect the curvature of space-time by their presence. The teenager snorts derisively. The language raises its voice. Surrounding every black hole is an event horizon, the boundary between where an object could escape from the black hole's gravitational pull and where everything irrevocably falls towards the central singularity. The teenager wanders off. The language regrets shouting. It is the 7-year-old who mentions beauty. So thank you, Sadie. So thank you, Jim, Jay, and Sadie. It's been such a privilege to get to know your work and to respond to it. And I've got 2 more poems that I'm going to read a little bit later on that respond to Nico and to Jeremy's work. The next thing we're going to look at is some poems that we wrote about love. It was Valentine's week, and we were thinking about how to write about a subject that's been written about a lot, but from your own unique position, and how to write about something from your own word hoard, to use a Henism, how to write from your own vocabulary, from the discourse you use, from the language you use. We looked at Carol Ann Duffy's poem Valentine, which is about how her Valentine's gift isn't a red rose but an onion with layers to peel away, likely to make you cry and to linger on your lips, as a rejection of the idea that love is like a red rose. And we looked at how, with our own very specific knowledge and sectors of knowledge, we could revisit old topics and argue back with the more hackneyed or more cliched language that's been used, and bring our own new knowledge to it. So in the next section, there are 3 poems, and you get to hear what an astrophysicist, a medic, and an art curator think love might actually be from their own unique vantage points. So I'm going to hand over to Sadie.
Okay, so this poem is called My Supernova Love. In the cold control room, blackout blinds are down. Starting the observation, checking coordinates now. Our first light curve from the NT telescope loads. Screen showing type 1a, white dwarfs dying throws. My very first supernova, light captured, successfully shown. I am here to help, to research, but also to run away, far from the memories of us together, him and me. He left, so could you be my supernova love? Last Christmas he left, walked out, cheated. So here I am this Christmas, can't allow the cold. How to get past the rejection, left me for her. Far away South America, I escape to find the warm, sunny days, nights observing supernova, stars that can't go on. Stars from which everything is born. Everywhere you are, this mountain, here in Chile, new love. Still, my heart mourns. He left, so could you be my supernova love? My supernova, who are you? New life from just a star. Zooming in a whole universe, millions, billions to see. Unlocking the meaning of each emission, what can it be? Trying to work out which source is yours. First, we can't be sure. Run the code, check mass limit, observing your ionizing core. Neutrinos settling, mass condensing, every single being born in you, every atom in my blood, you are already in my bones. He left, so could you be my supernova love? Cold and grey England, empty house awaits me there. On screen we found you, a star once glowing bright. Your curve is turning downwards, more throughout the night. Sat here, searching, waiting, measuring spectra faded light. Lines converging, superheated core, but why am I so cold? Life emerging, supernova, you made it all. Elements you created, oxygen, carbon, gold. You are in everything. Still, you are not home. He left, yet still it's him. He is my supernova love.
So this is called Love is Like. Love is like impressionism. Some people say such beauty and are satisfied with a flat copy to hint at the real thing. Love is like minimalism. Some people question, is it art? But do not compare what isn't there to what is. Love is like conceptual art. Some people claim, I could do that, but do not get the effort and vulnerability it takes.
This is the shape of our heart. Why is a heart shaped nothing like a heart? It's really just an oval with vessels, a body part. The oval shows how pointless love can sometimes seem, but the single point in the well-known shape means something more to me. The precarious base, the shape acute, the balance in love we're after, whilst up on top, 2 bumps, just lumps instead of the vena cava. They balance out the form, the spirit, the passions we share, the chores, the snores, the pickups, the striving to show we care. Whilst 2 in harmony move forth, the point can feel secure, and every day the work, concessions ensure our shape endures. But if one should grow, the other shrink, the cost of love too great, the shape may fall, and on they'll crawl to find their counterweight. In our balance, I know I'm safe. The wobbles are addressed. The screams, the tears we fight through with love this day and next. To pump my blood, I'll take the oval. It beats so I may be, sat astride our pointed heart, my perfect lump with me.
Thank you, Jay. And thank you all 3 of you for bringing so much of yourselves to that and rethinking different ways to talk about an oft discussed topic. I'm going to read 2 poems now that respond to Jeremy and to Nico's research. The first, Jeremy is a chemist who particularly works with new digital technologies to create intelligent laboratories where chemistry and AI things can talk to each other and make smoother processes. And I was reading something he'd written that was talking about the intelligent laboratory, and I ended up playing with his text and inserting some of my experiences of universities and campuses and the incredible, vibrant intellectual and creative communities that we can often find there. So this is in some ways a sort of celebration of that community that you find within universities, and it's called In the Intelligent Laboratory. In the intelligent laboratory, people, equipment, and computers work together. In the intelligent laboratory, everyone has a Bunsen burner license, but no one uses it because the sparks are in our head and the synthetic scientists can preempt the outcomes faster than we can light a taper. In the intelligent laboratory, we blend the computational and the theoretical, except on Thursdays when we stop for bourbons at 3, because team building becomes even more important when not all the team are human. The AI lot are improving their strictly banter at an alarming rate. And in the intelligent laboratory, we focus on chemical informatics and the application of novel mathematical approaches. But on Tuesday, we read novels for our feminist book club, led by the topological data analyst. On Friday, she makes advances in machine learning, and we stitch quilts for cold students who cannot leave campus and raise funds for their train fares home. In the intelligent laboratory, we value learning and people and progress. In the intelligent laboratory, we tell stories. Thank you, Jeremy. And this final poem from me, before I hand back to cohort, is in response to Nico's extraordinary work in acoustic engineering. I hadn't realized the pervasiveness of the tools that are provided by the work that he and his team do, and just how many real world applications there are for bubble acoustics. And this poem is something of my sense of wonder at the work. It's called Bubble Campanology. The masked barista tells me that she can tell the quality of coffee from the sound the milk makes bubbling. Pret's shit, she adds. And I want to tell her about the dolphins, how they blow bubble nets to herd the fish, that every bubble has its own sound, that we learn from the dolphins to use twin pulses to find the thing of interest amidst the clutter, the landmine in the debris. I want to tell her that bubbles are like bells, that we can be campanologists of air. And if we listen to those bubbles, we can tear apart tumors, destroy bacteria, monitor climate change, protect marine wildlife. It's all in the vibrations. She draws a smile for me in the froth of my coffee and tells the new trainee that I'm a regular and that I come in when I'm having a bad day. Do I? I want her to teach me the sound of good coffee. Thank you. It was only after I sent that poem to Nico and he was feeding back to me that he said that there was actually quite a lot of academic writing on the sound that milk makes as it's frothing, and that he'd done an incredible experiment of refracting sound through coffee. So it prompted an even bigger discussion. So maybe there's lots more poems in the acoustics of coffee and milk to come, but it's been such a joy to engage with. I can't really stress enough how creative an endeavour it's been. The group are now going to read a communal poem, which is written by everybody. I'm really interested in choral poetry. I'm a classicist after all, and what happens when a whole group come together to perform one text, when we as a group all commit to a text and we share it. It's decidedly harder to write a group collective poem on Zoom than it is if you're actually all in a room together, but I was really blown away by how well this group threw themselves into the task of trying to write a joint poem that could be written by everybody and performed by everybody. Everybody's performing, nobody's performing the parts they wrote, so it's a poem that everybody has written together and then performed together. So I'm going to ask them all to come onto the screen, and then I'll get rid of me, and then they can share this with you. It's something of a letter to the future, or perhaps a call to action or a statement of intent, but think of it as the cohort's message to another generation.
Actions, not words.
You got this. Say yes to scary things. Do your part.
Actions, not words.
Trust scientists to science, teachers to teach, but do your part.
Actions, not words.
The impact we have is through the acts we inspire.
Look, listen, learn.
Look again, listen harder, learn more.
It's complicated. Keep trying to understand.
Life is like a helix. Everything repeats, but each time we circle round, we get a chance to make a small difference.
Life is like a circular river, flowing by the same trees as the leaves change from one season to the next.
Life is like a double spiral. So many things connected, so many others nearby but out of reach, but worth the journey up and down, round and round.
Life is like the Woolworths pick and mix. Take from it what you want, but not too much or face the consequences at the till.
Look up at the stars.
I looked up at the stars. The desolate beauty reminded me what really matters.
Look down at the earth.
Buried treasure can be found in unexpected places.
Tides come in and go out. It can be calm. It can be stormy.
Only have 30 words to send a message, and you simply cannot think of your most important message. Send a picture.
Let the viewer decide.
It's complicated. Keep trying to understand.
Thank you, everybody. That was beautifully done. So we're going to finish off with a couple of goodbye poems. I might like to call them a couple of short poems that defied categorization and came out of just the very fertile creative period. So before I hand over to the cohort for their goodbye poems, I'm going to just say an enormous thank you to them. I know that these creative conversations will extend on and beyond this project, and I'm just incredibly grateful for the opportunity to have been part of it and to have been so welcome at the gallery and at the university. And I hope that it'll be the beginning of many such dialogues, cross-disciplinary dialogues. So thank you. And I'm now going to hand over to the cohort for 4 short goodbye poems. So thank you.
This is a poem inspired by the navigation age. What 3 words? Home. Often each poem closes ritual gaps, walks inch clever. Spoken pillow gains, quarrel kick hold, stay count fell. Deaf gears dine, repair expert froze, chair arch joke. Shell clouds ramp, pens chip bank, kind's cubes joy. Spray rigid feed, rear broom flown, carbon front speaks.
So this is my general thoughts on lockdown, framed through my poem, My Windowsill. I sit upon my windowsill. I'll sit and wait and mew until they set me free. How long it's been. Does wind still blow? Is grass still green? I hate that I have no control. I check the door, I'm on patrol. I cannot read the clock at all, but somewhere near the church bells toll. Is this the moment I'm released? I watch out for the metal beast. Alas, not yet. I feel a sap. I guess I'll take just one more nap. When in the lock, I hear the key. Rush the door. It's time. I'm free. Fresh air fills my little lungs, the smells carried on the breeze, rolling on my favourite dirt, sniff the things that brush my knees. I'll dance, I'll prance, I'll do it all. I've missed the world, I'll socialise, befriend the dog, perhaps unwise, climb this, jump that, fly to the sky. Okay, that's it. I've had my fill. I think I miss my windowsill.
So this is my little story about how sound is all around us. In the air, on land, and oceans deep, through babbling brooks and baby scans, sound does seep. It wakes us up, puts us in phase, makes us vibrate, and gives meaning to our days. In theatres, on railways, and while you sleep, through ancient structures and urban sprawl, the sound does seep. Follow the planes, signal the start, guide the fish, and break viruses apart. In the signals, through airwaves and hearts that beat, sailing ships, acoustic illusions, the sound does seep. From seas to surgeries, for cleaning, for healing, making a movie feel real with the sounds you are hearing. From the sounds you hear and go when you sleep to the ones you feel, the sound does seep. Unseen and unheard give meaning to our world. They return when you wake. The sound does seep.
And I would like to close with a haiku. Poetic science, two grand human adventures, stronger united.
Hello, everyone. Wow, I mean, what a great selection and compilation of poems. And I think that we are, incredibly kind of lucky. And I've heard a couple of these poems now before, and every single time I have to say they really get me. I kind of think we're slightly overrun, so unless anybody has any kind of immediate questions, I think there's probably quite a lot to take in right now. But before we close, I think it's very pertinent if we could say some thank yous to everyone who's been involved in this entire project throughout, and not least, of course, if we can say a huge thank you to our Poetic Science cohort. So it'd be great if each of the, if you could individually turn your screens on when I say your name as a thank you. So starting with Dr. Sadie Jones. Sadie, can you put your screen on?
Yeah, hi.
Hi, Sadie. Yeah, thank you so much, Sadie.
Thanks.
And Professor Jeremy Frey as well. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
You're very welcome. And of course, Professor Jim Anderson. And Dr. Nikhil Mistry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nikhil. Jonathan James.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you. And Hannah Cox.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. And of course, the wonderful Dr. Helen Eastman.
Thank you.
And of course, going on from that, so the wonderful background people, if you like, and of course, Lynn Dick, who's the head of programme for learning engagement at John Hansard Gallery. If you'd like to turn your screen, or if you're around still, that is, of course, by the way, Lynn. And also Diana Jokey, who's the communities curator, who's done, really supported this whole endeavour throughout as well. So Diana, thank you so much for all your support with this project. And of course, Hannah has also done some amazing background work as well, and whose work has been fantastic through the Poetry at JHG project, of which I was fortunate to work with Hannah on before when I was working at John Hansard Gallery. And as the Senior Engagement Fellow at the Public Engagement with Research Unit, of course, I'd really like to thank the Public Engagement Research Unit for all its support with this project. And of course, our wonderful Professor Rachel Mills, who has been a champion for this project as well, who's the Dean of the Faculty of Environmental and Life Sciences, as well as Professor Nikki Marsh, who's the Associate Dean for Research and Enterprise for the Faculty of Arts and Humanities. And also, notwithstanding as well, our Poetic Science Selection Panel from the English department. Would like to thank Professor Will May and the Emeritus Professor Peter Middleton. And a huge thank you to you all as well for being able to join us this evening. And I hope you've found it an inspiring reading. But just to say, a lot of work has really gone into this from the cohort. So, you know, they've been so courageous and done such a fantastic job. We hope that you enjoy the rest of SOTSEF, the Science and Engineering Festival, and just to also let you know that there is if you could fill out the feedback evaluation form at the end, that would be fantastic. And just to announce that on the 23rd of April, there will also be a celebration of World Book Night through the Public Engagement with Research Unit, which is featuring Philip Hoare, who will be talking about his new book, Albert and the Whale, and I'll post the web details for that, which are posted on the Researchers Cafe webpage. But again, without further ado, I just want to say thank you to everyone for such a great project and your input and support with all of this and dedication. And hopefully, as I say, this is a pilot project that we can continue this on. So thank you all very much for joining us and have a wonderful evening.